The I Mold You So podcast with Katie Buckland Weiss.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the I Mold You So podcast, where we uncover the hidden truths about mold illness, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and the mind-body-spirit connection and healing. Today's episode is especially meaningful for me because I'm sitting down with one of my physicians, Dr. Ben Edwards. Dr. Ben played a pivotal role in both my husband's and my journey through mold illness. When we were at our lowest, searching for answers, terrified, and stuck in the unknown, Dr. Ben was the one who helped us begin to connect the dots. What makes Dr. Ben so unique is his whole person approach to medicine. He doesn't just look at the lab results or write prescriptions. He considers the mind, body, and spirit, and he's not afraid to talk about how faith, peace, and even forgiveness play into our health. In this conversation, we'll explore mold illness and mycotoxin testing, the role of fight or flight in chronic disease, and why detox is essential for both sick and healthy people, and how treating the whole self leads to true healing. We'll also dive into his root cause philosophy and what he means when he says, "You're the cure." I can't wait for you to hear his wisdom. So let's go ahead and dive in. So Dr. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. It is great to have you here. I know you're so busy and out interviewing folks, seeing your patients, and sharing great information. So I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today.
You're welcome, Katie. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor, and it's so great to see you vibrant and healthy.
I feel it, and thank you for noticing that. So, Ben, we used to live in West Texas, and my husband is a physician. And when we moved to West Texas, we didn't know it at the time, but we were living in a new build that had mold. And my husband started to experience symptoms, and we couldn't put our finger on it. And so I was actually introduced to you because of my husband. He came to you. He was interested in your approach to medicine, and as your patient wanted to seek guidance. And so I first was introduced to you from my husband. And he, of course, came to you and sought care when he had these unexplained symptoms. And after his appointment with you, he came home very encouraged, both by your medical expertise and your openness to integrative medicine. And unlike conventional care, you emphasize the mind, body, and spirit, prescribing not just medical interventions, but also practices like getting sunshine, and specifically to my husband, reflecting on Proverbs 4:23, talking about the heart and protecting your heart. And we printed that out. Chris had that on his desk for the longest time, and we held on to that. We still do today. So thank you for that. I want you to expand a little bit more on that when we get into this. So through my husband, I came to meet you, and ultimately later in my own health crisis. So in November of 2023, within weeks, my health rapidly deteriorated. I had nerve pain, hypersensitivity, ER visits, and I was getting like little help. On Christmas Eve, I think, Chris really desperately reached out to you that afternoon, and I had been in the ER that night. The physician had encouraged Chris to get me a psych evaluation and consider SSRIs, and I was in poor shape. So Chris had been praying that afternoon on his knees, and then he's like, "I'm going to reach out to Ben." And you met us at your office. I don't know if you remember this, but you met us on your office, I believe it's Christmas Eve, and you helped get us just a short-term plan in place, get us through the holidays until the other doctors were back in the office. And you were providing some medical direction and emotional reassurance for both me and my husband. Again, thank you for that. So over the next couple of months, Ben, you ran labs, you were helping us interpret results, and you counseled me not only on my physical symptoms, but also about peace, forgiveness, and faith. Because for me, there was this, I was stressed out. My husband had been sick. We had moved to West Texas. I had anger issues, and I didn't know what was going on. And now I know part of this was triggered by the mold exposure. But you talked to me a lot about fear and anger and how that wasn't going to help my symptoms. And you were so right. So you also supported us through the detox and additional therapies at Veritas. I was doing ozone therapy, things like that. But even Ben, when I was in there having therapies done, I remember one day, so one of my symptoms was nerve pain. And I couldn't wear anything but muumuus or jumpers. I couldn't have a waistband. I couldn't have a bra strap. I couldn't have anything on my body touching. It was just too painful. And in May of 2024, I had a little reprieve for a couple weeks. My symptoms settled down. I know now I was out of my house for those weeks, but you noticed, you're like, "Hey, you're in blue jeans." And I was making progress, and I really appreciated that. As busy as you are, you noticed that I was not in a muumuu. I was in blue jeans, and my symptoms were getting a little bit better until they got worse in July. So all that being said, you, Ben, were really our dot connector. So over the summer of 2024, when my symptoms worsened and the ER doctor suspected fungal pneumonia, my husband ran some mycotoxin test, and it came back lit up. But my husband did not know how to interpret that. So he reached out to you and you helped us interpret those results. And those mycotoxin tests came back. The results were extremely high. So you introduced us to the concepts of the VCS test, the vision test. And then you also mentioned Marcons to me and said, there's this nasty infection and it's tough to treat, but all of this is lining up. I think you could be, suffering from mold exposure. And you said, hey, I'm not your guy, but let me connect the dots for you. And you should consider working with a doctor that does the Shoemaker protocol, which lo and behold, a week later, I was due in Dallas for a hematology visit. There was a doctor, Dr. Osini, that does the Shoemaker protocol. And I was able to get in with him within days. So again, we would not have been able to put those pieces together without you. So thank you, Ben.
You're welcome. That's what we try to do. Obviously, try to help people in these mold cases or tough cases, and especially when you're right in the middle of it and at the beginning of it. A lot easier in some cases. We had a phone call from a mama out on the East Coast, and her little girl had been going to all these different medical facilities, was at Duke currently. But I had that advantage of just that there of we've been to all these medical facilities, super smart doctors, Duke. And
Right.
that's a clue right there already. I'm wondering, is there mold even before I hear all the symptoms? So, but when you're in the beginning of it, like when you were, and when there's multiple factors, which we can get into all that in a minute, but sometimes it's harder to connect those dots early. Sometimes it's a little easier later and all along the way, but I'm glad we were able to connect those dots and get you to the experts who are expert dealing with these toxins that moldy buildings can expose people to.
Exactly. And I think that's the importance of speaking with you and sharing the messaging, is that so people know that this is a possibility, or that
Yep.
physicians can have it on their checklist. Because just like your patient, this little girl, I had been to 15, 20 doctors. I'd been in and out of the ER, and we were looking at MS, Parkinson's, all these things, and nobody brought up mold. So we're doing that today. We're going to talk more about it. So I'd love, Ben, when I think about our listeners, and our listeners are folks that may are sick and not finding answers, or maybe they know that they have water damage in their homes, but really wanting to look at things relating to mold illness wherever they are in the process. And when I think about my own journey on this, really, you were the one that kind of put the pieces together for mold illness and the mycotoxin piece of this. But I remember that conversation with you. You talked a little bit about the college population of mold illness. So I'd love to touch on that. Of course, detox, that's been huge for me. And I know in a lot of the work that you do, you emphasize detoxing. So I want to talk about that. The whole self, the role of unpeace and what that can play in someone's illnesses and ultimate recovery, how fight or flight pulls into that, root cause medicine, and of course, getting back to the cure. I mean, when I started listening to your podcast 4 years ago, it was catchy, but now I totally get it. And I witnessed that, and I am pure testimony to that,
Yeah.
But I had help along the way. Along the way. So when you remember, I want to just ask you a couple questions. When you remember, or when you think about how you first came into our family's life, mine and Chris's life, and the role you played in those early days with my husband, can you just share with me a little bit about anything you recall about working with Chris or working with me during my health crisis that maybe stuck out to you?
Well, like with many patients that come, number one, what sticks out is you're willing to have an open mind to look outside the box. And of course, that's easier to have an open mind when you're not getting answers or relief with the conventional standard of care box that we all are trained to look to first when we're suffering and sick and having symptoms. But just that openness and willingness, because honestly, there's a lot of people who don't keep pushing and digging and pressing. They'll just go with the answer of go see the psychiatrist and start some antipsychotics or antidepressants or whatever, which I'm not putting that down if it's needed, but I'm just saying the fact that y'all are looking outside the box, that's number one. The number two thing, and again, this is most patients that end up with us, is there's a story there, a life story of stress. And, obviously COVID was a stress on the entire world, but definitely on healthcare practitioners in particular, and especially healthcare practitioners who started looking outside the box themselves at trying to help patients, meaning treat them. Because it's kind of the standard early answer from the health authorities was there's nothing you can do to treat. But then there was this minority group of doctors across the country that figured out, no, there's ways to treat these symptoms. Inhaled budesonide, a steroid, ivermectin, different things, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin A, other things. So that stands out too. The stress event, and then someone who's going to do something kind of outside the norm or the conventional standard, and there's peer pressure in an institutional clinical setting.
Absolutely.
If the whole institution's not behind you, then you're basically a lone man out there, and that's a massive stressor. On top of just the stress of patient load, COVID, the news, the lockdown, all the societal stuff that was going on. So that's a big red flag for sure. And that's a point I want to make on the podcast because obviously this is about mold. And I'll have some patients ask me, like, why am I suffering from mold right now if they're in their 30s, 40s, or 50s? Where maybe I was exposed in my teens or 20s or whatever. So oftentimes it's a matter of, I like to use this bathtub analogy. There's one drain at the bottom of that bathtub to drain out, but the more you're putting more and more faucets, turning on more and more and more, and this is toxicity, which
Mm-hmm.
we live in a toxic soup already, just air pollution, our food's polluted, our water's polluted, everything. Even if you try to be kind of cleaned up, I mean, we're in a off gassing in buildings, all this stuff. So
Yes.
we're just more and more is dumping in on top of nutrient depleted food. Even if you try to eat better, our farming techniques, we've just depleted the soil. So even an apple and an orange and a carrot, health foods, quote unquote, may not have the vitamin mineral content. We know they don't. Actually, from the 1950s to the 1990s,
Mm-hmm.
there's studies that show this huge decline. So we're less able to handle the toxic loads that are coming in. But what I've found in my practice is almost always there's a pretty major stress event or a cumulative stress, and that like puts the body over the edge. Like, that's it. I can't, and it just starts to overflow. That drain at the bottom to drain toxins, to deal with germs, deal with mold toxins, other toxins, the ability of that drain to flow well and keep these toxicities out is so dependent upon what I call the terrain,
Mm-hmm.
which is related to diet. It's related to the nutrient. I mean, we have enzymes in the body, detoxification enzymes in particular for this kind of case. Well, those enzymes, those are workers. I describe them, or people can kind of get this because most people understand vitamin D. When the sun hits your skin makes vitamin D. Well, it doesn't just poof magically, just vitamin D come out of nowhere. Vitamin D is actually coming from cholesterol, but there's an enzyme that goes in and clips a molecule off cholesterol or a couple molecules and changes it. It's no longer cholesterol. It's a hormone, actually. We call it vitamin D, but it's a hormone. But the workers that are doing that work, adding stuff on, clipping stuff off, actually doing the physical cleaving and additions, those are enzymes. Well, these enzymes are workers that are just sitting on the shelf, not doing anything until they're powered up by minerals. And our
Mm-hmm.
food is mineral depleted. And so we need to work on nutrition to help our detox enzymes. And minerals need a good pH in your stomach, gastric pH, to help absorb the magnesium and the calcium and the potassium and the iron and all the things. We need good pH, a pH of 1 to 2. That's battery acid levels. Well, stress shuts off your acid pumps.
Wow.
So it's this combination of things, this kind of perfect storm, nutrient depletion, stress turns off my acid pumps. Even though I'm trying to eat, I'm not breaking it down and absorbing it. It's not you are what you eat, it's what you can break down and absorb into the body. And that's
Mm-hmm.
so dependent upon a good, healthy GI tract, good microbiome, all the good probiotics in the gut, which our standard American diet decimates our probiotics in our gut. So all these things affect that drain. Lack of nutrition, lack of good digestion, lack of probiotics, sunshine, you mentioned, huge for the terrain. Good sleep, good oxygen while you're asleep. A lot of people, their airway gets compromised. We call it sleep apnea. But
Yep.
that compromised airway, lack of oxygen all night long, your brain senses that lack of oxygen and it won't let itself go into the deeper levels of sleep. And you've got to hit those deeper levels to get your growth hormone to produce at night. Growth hormone should be called repair hormone. Every
Okay.
night you should go into deep sleep, growth hormone or repair hormone kicks in, and you start auto cleaning, auto detoxing, auto self repairing, self regenerating. Your cells in your body die all the time. You make new ones all the time. You're a total recycling, regenerating machine. It's amazing. And most of that's done at night. But you got to be into that deeper sleep, meaning you got to have good oxygen. And if you don't, you won't go to the deeper sleep and get the growth hormone. And so it's a multifactorial thing. And Americans in particular tend to live and sit instead of move and think and be in stressful situation that compromises that drain.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get this perfect storm and we get a boom, a big mold toxicity. Whenever you moved into that building or home or whatever it is, you might be okay for a little bit, but just imagine those faucets are really filling this tub now. And then you throw a stress event in there and that drain's shrinking down and you reach this perfect storm of just the
Yes.
bottom falls out and you're just symptom wise. And people need to understand conventionally trained doctors like myself and Chris, your husband, we're trained actually very narrowly to label symptoms with a name. You know, if you have headaches, your doctor's going to ask you, well, is it like a rubber band around your head squeezing? Or is it more like behind one eye, like an ice pick, and bright light makes it worse and noise makes it worse? You get a little nauseated with it, feels better when you're in a dark room. Or is it more of a pressure under your eyes, like in your sinuses, worse when you bend over and you have a little congestion with it? Because there's only a certain number of names. These are called diagnoses that go
Right?
with
That we
headache.
all
So,
want, right? We
yeah.
all want the answer.
So tension headache, that's a rubber band. Migraine headache, that's the ice pick and the lights and the noise make worse. And then sinus headaches, and there's a cluster headache. But basically, there's a limited number of diagnoses or labels, I call them names, for a symptom called headache. Once a doctor, so doctors are highly trained to match your set of symptoms to that label, and then the game's over. At that point, it's a matching game. You made your
Right.
match, and then there's a pharmaceutical to treat whichever label it was. So a tension headache has a pharmaceutical different than a migraine label. That has a whole different pharmaceutical. I mean, that's fine. Imitrex for migraine. If you have a bad migraine, you need to record a podcast and you can pop an Imitrex and it takes that
Get through
symptom
it,
away.
right.
Heck yeah, who wouldn't want that? But so that's conventional medical training. That's okay. But it turns out now we understand high blood pressure, high blood sugar, migraines, and really everything, guys. It's so hard for a conventional Western mind to wrap around this, especially doctors.
It
But
is.
all these
Yes.
things have a deeper root cause, and it's related to what I'm talking about with the drain and the toxicity. We're just not giving the body what it needs and avoiding what it doesn't need enough to support it to function like it's supposed to. Your body's designed and equipped to identify germs, kill them, and neutralize them and excrete them from you. Identify toxins, all toxins, not just mold toxins. Get them, excrete them, boom. I mean, you're designed to identify cancer cells, kill them, excrete them, boom. I mean, we are a self-defending machine. But all that equipment to do that needs stewarded. It needs the sunshine, the oxygen at night, the good sleep, the growth hormone, repair hormone cycle, all the things, the minerals, everything. And doctors aren't trained. This is called diet and lifestyle medicine. Doctors aren't trained in nutrition. We're not trained in diet and lifestyle. We're not trained in sunshine. The mitochondria, which is the carburetors in our cells, that's where the
Yes.
real amazing stuff happens. When you can steward that mitochondria and it can make plenty of energy for your cell, then it'll do its job. And so across the board, and that's where mold really comes in, it really impacts that mitochondria in a negative way so that mitochondria is making so much oxidative stress or inflammation. That inflammation damages all the internal pathways so much. And that's why you can have all these random symptoms that don't fit any label from a conventional doctor training. They just don't fit the label. Or even if they do fit some of the labels and you take a pharmaceutical for it, it typically doesn't work, or it doesn't work very long or very well, because this mold toxicity damages across the board these mitochondria so significantly, jacks up the immune system. Your immune system's multi-branched, like the Navy, the Army, the Coast Guard, the Air Force, the Marines. And when you get this mold toxicity, it totally dysregulates that balance. And certain branches or certain parts of this immune system are just going haywire, nuts, out of control, inflamed, leading to all these symptoms. So anyways, I kind of forget the question. I went off on a
No,
tangent there.
this is fantastic, Ben. And one of the things in hearing you talk about this is when I was going through this and I had all these symptoms and going to the neurologist and going to the urologist and going to sports medicine and doing all this. And okay, we think it's this, and they'd give me a pharmaceutical. I was on a nerve medicine of some sort. And I was so hopeful. Okay, and I was so desperate. So I have to say that I was so desperate for relief. I wanted to be a mom to my children. I wanted to be a wife to my husband. I wanted to get back to work. I wanted to do all the things. And so, okay, this nerve medicine will help me. I get on it 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. I'm not getting any better. I'm only getting worse. But we weren't putting the pieces together. And so the conventional doctors, nothing against them. They're looking at my symptoms. Okay, this must be this. Let's give her this. Take the prescription. And it wasn't touching it,
Yeah.
And I can't speak to this enough that I had the luxury of getting access to healthcare very quickly. I have a great insurance program through work and was able to, I was picking up the phone, calling, do you have any cancellations? Can I get in? And we were, okay, maybe it's this, let's treat this. But after months of this, everything was a dead end. It was falling
Yeah.
short and I was getting sicker. This is just everything you're saying just reinforces that
Yeah.
because I wouldn't fit in a box. I
Right.
was not in a box. And
Right.
so, as you said, we were forced to think outside of the box. And by the grace of God, my husband thinks outside of the box. And we were introduced to folks like you. And, um, and that is what ultimately led to my healing,
Yeah.
right?
And I want to encourage the folks that with COVID now that so there's certain things I have in my mind. I'll run my checklist when someone comes in inflamed, which that's every disease is rooted in inflammation.
Hmm.
And if you get the diet and lifestyle tuned up in the vast majority of people, the inflammation goes down, the mitochondria is working better, so inflammation goes down, their symptoms go away. In the vast majority, we're talking diabetes, high blood pressure, fibromyalgia, autoimmune disease like
Yes.
lupus, RA, all these things can get better with what I call the basics or the four pillars is what we teach: nutrition, hydration, movement, and peace. Because you're just opening up that drain and you're turning off some of those faucets too, because you're cleaning up your home, your diet, all this stuff. So I want to always encourage people that those kind of basics seem like minimal or basic things. They can be powerful. But when you've done that or you are doing that and you're not seeing the needle move, then I start thinking, okay, is there a toxic load? Now, these days we have to think about the spike protein. And that
Yes.
was one of the things. And you can't have multiple. You can have mold toxin, spike protein toxin, root canal toxins.
That
That's a whole
perfect
different.
storm, all the
Yes.
stuff coming together.
So, yeah, and you kind of go down some rabbit holes. And I've seen people with weird symptoms and we check their spike protein antibody. It is greater than 2,500, which is the highest Quest Labs will go, and normal's less than zero point 0.8. And we put them on a spike protein detox. And in 30 days, 60 days, 9 days, they're 80, 70% better. So
So
I
they
want,
have a direction, but they're also doing the supportive therapies as well with hydration and sunshine and
yep,
diet, nutrition, all of those things in addition
yep,
to.
yep. So, as people listening or even healthcare practitioners listening, kind of my list that I'll run down is the spike protein. Now, of course, we didn't have to have that on our list, before 2020, but that is a thing now. I have to consider spike protein toxin, mold toxin, root canals. Those have anaerobic bacteria. Those are bacteria that don't require oxygen. They're the toxins they secrete are very pro inflammatory. They can
Okay.
trigger the exact same chronic inflammatory response syndrome. I'll think about Lyme, which is a bug from tick bites. And those are kind of the top ones that I'll think. So for people listening, super sick, unexplained symptoms, your doctor can't figure it out, those are kind of some of the top things you might run through in your mind: root canals, mold, spike protein, and then Lyme or co-infections of Lyme. Just kind of a side note there.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Just put it out there. Could it be this? Could it be this? So I mentioned when we were talking through this and you were helping us connect the dots, you mentioned you had some college age students that were suffering from mold illness. And there's a lot of kids in college and a lot of kids in dorms. Can you talk to me just a little bit about that? What these students might be showing up with at your door?
Hmm.
And then we can talk a little bit about detox as well.
Yep. Yep. For sure. And I do want to throw in here because I've seen two and heard about a third just in the past month. And these happen to be the wives and some of the kids of pastors who moved into the parsonage that the local church had for them to live in, and it was full of mold. And
Wow.
they're young, kind of like your story, young moms, young kids, and their health just starts to deteriorate. And this one family, it took 2 years to figure it out. And the way she figured it out, the pastor's wife figured it out, was at a conference. A pastor's wife conference happened to be kind of sharing some of her story with another pastor's wife. And that wife had gone through the same thing in their parsonage years
Oh,
before, but
wow.
was so toxic, their little baby actually died from it.
Oh,
So, I mean, this can be a real serious deal, but that connected the dot for that pastor's wife who then reached out to us. But so that's kind of on my radar now, too. If
yes.
pastor's wife, super sick, the parsonage, if it's an older home, and these all happen to be, but doesn't have to be an old home. But
Right.
these
It
college
doesn't.
girls, you mentioned it was 3 in a row, and this was a couple years ago. I mean, young, healthy, vibrant, athletic, trim. I mean, they had no reason to be sick and hadn't been sick. And then boom, move to college and start to deteriorate pretty rapidly, pretty quickly in that first semester. And it'll sometimes with those ladies, a brain fog, mood changes, just fatigue, feeling blah, feeling sick, starting to get sick. And you can maybe as a parent or a doctor even chalk some of that up to, well, they move, so they're more,
Right.
maybe they're lonely and homesick or stressed, or it's a new environment. They're staying up till midnight or later. They're maybe doing things college kids do, and they're not eating as good, and just all that kind of stuff. So you might, and the young women or men themselves might even think that, and they'll kind of ignore some of that. But these ladies in particular, these 3 young ladies, it was their memory and their energy. They
Ugh.
could not get out of bed. The one girl could barely even put a sentence together anymore, was having trouble remembering her mother's name.
Yes, I relate. I had the
Talking to
same
mom on the
symptoms.
phone was kind of forgetting her mom's name. So when you see a dramatic change, moving into a dorm, I mean, these dorms, obviously, unless you're happen to be in a brand new dorm, these are 30, 40, 50-year-old buildings sometimes, especially smaller schools, lower budget. They don't have time. I mean,
To
so yeah,
remediate, keep them
these
up.
college kids, if you see a deterioration when your kids go to college, especially if it's significant, don't ignore that. Don't just chalk that up to, freshman, lifestyle changes. It definitely can be mold. And like you said, Katie, when you left the house, now looking back, you realize, oh, when I felt better, I was out of the house. That's the
Right.
test. When these kids go home from go home for the weekend or go home for an extended time like Thanksgiving break, Christmas break, spring break, and they get clarity all of a sudden, there's your test right there. If there's a dramatic change, that's mold.
Yeah, but it takes, hindsight looking at that. I just had Kate Miller on my podcast last week. She's also in West Texas and she has 4 children. They were all suffering from mold illness and SIRS. And looking back, she's like, well, my daughter would stay away for the weekend, at a friend's house and she'd come back and she'd go to school on Monday feeling great. But when she was home for the weekend, she couldn't go to school on Monday because she was so sick. And
Mhm.
I actually just put that together for myself. Like, oh, we were in DFW for a week. And all of a sudden, I could wear blue jeans. It wasn't hurting me. I could remember things better. I was able to sleep a little bit better. But it's because that toxin level was give me just a little reprieve, just a little reprieve, you know?
Mhm.
But you bring up a good point, Ben, too. It's not just old buildings. We were in a new build home. And I have learned, I was just speaking with a real estate professional but saying, hey, these new homes, that doesn't protect you. Like they're
Yeah.
sealed so tight they don't breathe. And it can be a breeding ground for mold. And
Yeah.
we had a water leak in our house and we thought our builder took care of it, didn't mold set up in the sheetrock. But that mold took hold of my husband a lot quicker than it took hold of me. But he was in a high stress, right? He was coming off COVID, treating patients, all of that. And that situation you described, and it attacked him differently than it got me and my son. But slowly it will creep in with that load and then it can take a shape in a form, that might look a little bit different for everybody.
Yeah.
But what I am learning, Ben, is there's somewhere between, 15 and 20 symptoms. And if you're checking off 6, 7, 8 of these, you are likely suffering from SIRS. Fortunately enough, we found the mold in our home and connected the dots, remediated, and then of course moved on and we're healing. But when we look at some of these cases, I'm understanding that there's about 25% of the population has a kind of a genetic makeup that makes them more susceptible to these.
Right.
So you could be living in that home, Ben, and not have any trouble. Where me, I'm debilitated on long-term disability, very sick and getting sicker by the day. So I want to talk a little bit about that makeup, but also I found out that I am MTHFR. I have the MTHFR gene, which made this even more difficult. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So that genetic predisposition, there that 25% of people, so there's a genetic type where they have a harder time neutralizing the mold toxins once they're in the body. They have a hard time grabbing them, neutralizing, breaking them down, and excreting them. So these toxins end up just getting stuck in the body, recirculating, and driving that inflammatory process. So if you happen to be that genetic type, which there is a blood test, HLA blood test that will determine this, if you're more predisposed to not being able to handle moldy environments, that blood test will show you that. But yeah, just like you said, in some cases where I'm suspecting mold in one person in the family, and oftentimes the spouse, would say, I don't know about that because I feel fine. Like you just said, the one
Right.
person, they'll have a different genetic type. They can totally be in that environment and excrete that toxin, no problem. So yeah, that is definitely something to be aware of, and don't exclude mold as a possible diagnosis just because everyone else in the house seems to be okay and you're not. You can get that blood test to see if you have the HLA type that you're predisposed to it. And then a lot of people have that MTHFR gene mutation.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, what this is, there's an enzyme I mentioned earlier, these workers that do the work in the body. So, to take one of our B vitamins called folic acid has to
Okay.
be converted from a type of folic acid into a more active or usable form of folic acid. So, this conversion has to take place so that that folate can be utilized in the body. This B vitamin can actually go to work and be used. Well, the enzyme that does that conversion is what this gene mutation causes less enzyme function. So methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase is the name of that enzyme. That's what
Let me
the
get that.
MTHFR stands for. But basically, you're taking a methyl, a 10 methyl group down to a 5 methyl group. This enzyme just doing some cleaving. But people that have this gene mutation, they don't have that enzyme working fully, and they just can't process that folate or folic acid the right way. And therefore, they're basically folate deficient. And well, folate's needed for a lot of these detox pathways to break down not just mold like estrogens, because we have to
Okay.
break down the estrogen and excrete it. So some ladies have estrogen dominant symptoms. It's because they're not breaking that estrogen down. And there's xenoestrogens or estrogen like compounds in the environment. We're getting estrogens from our food. So, anyways, that's just another example of where this mutation, MTHFR mutation, can impact. But detoxification is highly dependent upon that methylfolate reductase enzyme working properly. So, yeah, double whammy for you with the HLA type that doesn't handle mold well. And then in general, not a great detoxifier. But I also want to say, to not sound doom and gloom on the genetic thing, I believe in epigenetics, which I mean, everybody does. We know that environmental factors out, epi means above the genes or outside the genes. Like with that MTHFR, there's a population I read about in a book one day, somewhere in the Mediterranean, Sicily, or somewhere. They studied this group, and the whole group has the MTHFR gene mutation.
Okay.
But as they studied their diseases and symptoms, they don't have any of the associated diseases or problems with it. And they look at the diet, and their diet is loaded with methylated folate.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
green leafy vegetables contain methylfolate, as does organ meats like beef liver. But they're eating a ton of green leafies, getting their methylfolate that way. So they kind of bypass. They didn't need that enzyme to be functioning because they were just consuming that end product folate already, methylated version of it that's in green leafies. That's just one example of, and it's why we preach it so much on diet, and not just diet, the other factors that influence our genetic expression. So the more robust and healthy you can be in your diet and your lifestyle, the better you're going to set your body up for success, even when you do have some genetic predispositions.
Well, and thanks to you, Ben, and being informed about the importance of organ meat, you can find me in the kitchen cooking up liver, which I never,
That a
never thought I'd
girl,
do.
Katie. Proud of you.
Okay, so for the folks listening, we talked about, HLA and MTHFR and that there's a test that can be done. If I'm just the lay person, can I go into my family practitioner's office and say, "Hey, can you test me for MTHFR or HLA?" Or is that somebody where you probably need to go to an integrative doctor? Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Most likely integrative, but I will say that MTHFR has been well known. I mean, when I first started 13 years ago in the integrative world, that was sort of becoming a thing. So, I mean, it's been around actually a long time. And so many podcasters and health hack, biohack guys, Huberman, and all these other folks talk about it all the time. So, I don't know. There may be enough, conversation in the world about it where a regular doctor may have heard of that. I mean, the test is widely available, Quest, LabCorp, wherever your doctor, is doing their labs. So if they just had a little bit of open mind, I mean, they could call Quest or have their nurse call Quest and get the code for the order and order it for you. So it's worth asking at least, but
Right.
don't be surprised if they don't know what it is. Probably less likely to know anything on the HLA type.
Okay.
And even in the integrative world, I mean, depending on the experience or the training of the integrative holistic practitioner, of course, they're going to be way more open minded, but they may not know about mold. A lot do, but some don't. And they don't know about the HLA typing if they haven't looked at Dr. Shoemaker's protocol or gone to a conference or read a book or got some education on mold. They may not know about it, kind of going to the Shoemaker protocol. And I probably told you this, Katie, but there's certain things, cancer, mold, certain things I believe personally that a practitioner that's treating those needs to pretty much just treat those. because there's so much to know. There's so much nuance to it and new information that'll come in. You need to kind of be focused on that, stay up to date on that, and go to the conferences on that and go get extra training on just that subject matter. And so finding a practitioner who's expert in that, focused just on that, and stays up to date on that, that's going to be your best bet. And of course, for mold, that's a Shoemaker protocol.
Yeah. And that held true for us. There was a list of physicians across the country that practiced Shoemaker protocol. We were just fortunate enough that someone was within, a couple hours of us that we were able to see. And he's actually 10 minutes from us now. So
Wow.
it's fantastic. I don't have to see him as much because I'm getting better from following
Yep.
that Shoemaker protocol. But I want to mention that there are other protocols and that are available to treat mold. But for me, Shoemaker was the way to go. But one of the interesting things is there was some emphasis on magnesium. For me, Ben, and listening to myself, I felt very sick whenever I was taking magnesium. And that's probably, because of something else. But when I was healing and I started feeling better, I realized, and I had to listen to myself, like whenever I take magnesium, I feel worse. I feel
Yeah.
worse. So I actually removed magnesium from my recovery plan, and great. I mean, look
Yeah.
at me now. I'm like 90% better. So that leads me to recognizing, there's conventional medicine, there's integrative medicine, but there's also listening to yourself, right?
Yes.
And when you talk about you're the cure, and I just love that. And it holds so true. And this is for me personally, but I imagine you see this daily, if not hourly in your office when the pieces come together. Can you talk to me a little bit about you're the cure and also the peace pillar? Because, we're talking about stress, fight or flight, and we don't have enough time today to get into that. But that was so true for me. I was in a high stress situation and pressures from work, pressures from mom, pressure from sick husband, COVID, all of these things happening. And I just cracked. It's a perfect formula and my drain was clogged. But there were other factors like constantly being in fight or flight and just like zinging is almost it. And having these stresses, but recognizing like, man, I have to unwind here. And that is a really heavy lift, Dr. Ben. That's not something a pill can fix and a meeting with you is going to fix. So talk to me a little bit just about you're the cure and the peace pillar and how this factors into wellness and recovery.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking that because that's my favorite part because that's when I'll see aha moments, light bulbs come off, junk just come shed off of people. I mean, set free. Just this lightness, this life coming back into people when they have their own personal aha moment. And I 100% agree with you, like on the magnesium. Listen to your own body. I mean, a doctor can only give you their opinion, and a conventional doctor's opinion is going to be based off where he's come out of, which is pretty narrow, as already mentioned. Integrative doctors are going to have a bigger toolbox to treat your symptoms and different, ways of thinking. So their ideas and opinions will be a little more broad and be a little different, but it's just one man or woman's opinion. And ultimately, now this is a real personal and really a spiritual matter and journey for people. But I believe the Bible. I follow Jesus, and He said it's better that I go because the Holy Spirit's going to come, and the Holy Spirit's going to be your counselor and your teacher, and is going to lead you into all truth. Now, in the Western world, even if you grew up in a religious or biblical kind of base, in my experience, for me personally, but also a lot of my clients and patients, like we don't really believe that. I mean, we believe, okay, that's the true verse, but is it really true? The Holy Spirit can lead me into all truth. How does that really happen? God
Right.
speaks. Can I hear God? I mean, that's a whole nother podcast too. But I do. After 13 years of doing this, 100% believe that whether you want to call it your intuition, that still small voice inside of you, following that gut instinct, listen to that thing, learn to cultivate that, practice that, and trust that and follow that, and ask God to reveal and show you and listen. And that's the hard part is listening. We got to quiet, we got to turn off the distractions and all that. And that's a practice. But back to You're the Cure. I mean, 13 years ago when I left conventional medicine, 7 years of practicing conventional, I didn't know anything about holistic. None of my family, my granddads are MDs, uncles MDs, great granddad MD. But I was introduced to nutrition at first, and I saw in my own patients dramatic turnarounds. I'm talking getting off meds, they're no longer diabetic, ulcerative colitis clearing up, lupus clearing up by changing their diet.
Yes.
So
I
it
remember you sharing those stories, Dr. Ben, at dinner, and I can't believe it. So for anybody listening, please go look up that podcast. I know you share these stories. It is, I mean, it's miracles just by changing your diet.
Yeah. And it was I won't go into the whole story, but it was 10 of my sickest patients, and this integrative, functional, holistic doctor challenged me, said, "Just send me your," because I was in an I was basically arguing with this doctor for a year. He was telling me, "All this is reversible. If you weren't born with it, you don't need to keep it, and these are all consequences, they're not diseases," and, I mean, just kinda crazy talk, and I just argue with him, but he would say just enough to pique my interest where I'd call him back. And after about a year of doing this, he's like, "I'm tired of going back and forth with you. Let me just show you in your own patients. Send me your 10 sickest patients that have been everywhere, tried everything, and they're not any better." So when those 10 patients came back well, totally blew my mind. But I'm
10
just
of
saying,
10 came back well.
all, yes, off their meds, disease is gone, blood sugar normal, no more lupus symptoms, no more fibromyalgia symptoms, no more ulcerative colitis, normal colonoscopy. And that was mostly dietarily. And it was mostly quit the sugar and quit the processed vegetable oils, these basic changes. And that's where You're the Cure came from early on when I started practicing my own practice, more holistic. I had a radio station in Lubbock, Texas called AM talk radio, said, "Hey, will you come on once a week? There's an hour show that we do where listeners call in and ask health questions." I was like, "Sure. I mean, I'm barely learning this new stuff, but if I don't know, I'll just say I don't know. But yeah, that'll be fun. Educate the people." And the guy said, "Okay, well, we got to name your show something." And I just kind of pulled that out of the air. I'm sure his Holy Spirit was putting it in my heart, because now it's just 13 years later, it's like, that was so true. But I'm just saying that initial thought, seeing these people get better. I mean, when a diabetic goes, he's on 3 meds for diabetes and his blood sugar's still through the roof, A1C's in the 11s, and he comes back with a normal A1C, normal blood sugar, off his meds, and a doctor didn't do that. I mean, a doctor taught him what to do as far as dietarily and
Right.
movement, resistance training and sunshine and stuff. So a doctor should be a teacher and just teach the person the way the body was designed, but then the body fixes itself. You are the cure. It's lack of knowledge. We just didn't know the truth.
Amen.
And so as we
Right.
bring the truth, bring the knowledge, and the person starts to walk in that truth, then the body starts to self-detoxify, self-regenerate, self-heal, all the things. When you get a paper cut, you don't worry about it. You don't think twice about it. You don't think you're going to bleed to death. You just go on about your business because you know your body's got a program built in, and that program turns on, and boom, 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 a clot is formed and new skin cells come in and stem cell, and boom, it's a new skin. You don't think about it. My little daughter broke her collarbone the other day, actually coming off a horse. And, as long as it's kind of lined up, and actually with the collarbone, it doesn't have to be lined up too close even. And that bone will remodel and just grow, and it'll be perfect where you can't even tell it was fractured. We get it with those kind of things, paper cuts and broken bones. It heals. Well, it heals in every way, but it
Right.
needs supported and it needs the knowledge. So that's where You're the Cure came from in the podcast. Now it moved beyond a radio show to a podcast. And actually, we just launched a course. It's a 9-module course called You're the Cure, where we kind of put our 13 years of knowledge into a digestible, curated content. So there's a You're the Cure program. But to the peace pillar. So early on, as I was fascinated by this self-healing thing, I felt like the Lord really put it on my heart. Just teach the 4 basics: nutrition, hydration, movement, and peace. So that's what we did. Now, for all of us, it's easier to go to the nutrition, the
Right.
movement, the hydration. I mean, I've got my water here. People get used to just fill up your water, put a little relight or some minerals, some
Mhm.
electrolytes in there, and you can get a habit going. I mean, it can be harder on the diet, but you can get it done. You can change that diet. I mean, these are things that in the physical realm, we can just get it done.
Right.
And
Check it off. You can attain it, right?
exactly. And oftentimes see a ton of benefit in those first few years. That's where we camped out, get off the sugar, and man, inflammation drops. So it's awesome. But here's what we learned over time: that 4th one, peace. So people would get better, and then 4 or 5 years down the road, they're back with symptoms. But doc, I'm still eating good. I'm still walking. I'm still doing all the things, taking my supplements or whatever they were doing. But this and this symptom came back, and almost always you could peg it chronic stress, fight or flight. They're eating good, exercising perfect, but that fight or flight kicks in. And when fight or flight kicks in, then your body, it's an amazing design, because fight or flight's really supposed to be very once in a blue moon. A tiger, you're walking down the trail and here comes a mountain lion or a bear, and boom, you need to go into fight or flight for a few minutes. just to fight to kill that tiger or to run away from him. But in, 5, 6, 7 minutes, it's done. The danger's gone. You killed him or he killed you or what, you ran away. But that should be so rare and just momentarily.
But
And
we're
so
sitting in it. We're sitting in it.
exactly. And here's the systems that the body purposefully turns down in that moment. You turn down because you don't need to worry about digesting your last meal right now when a tiger's about to eat you. You can digest your breakfast later. So it
Mhm.
turns down your whole GI tract, those stomach acid pumps I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
peristalsis, gallbladder and pancreas function, microbiome, all that gets turned down. And your immune system. You don't need to worry about killing a germ right now because you got to kill the tiger. So it'll turn the immune system down, the white blood cell function. So we're more susceptible to infection. And then endocrine, that's the hormones. You don't need to worry
Mhm.
about pregnancy and growing a baby right now. You need to worry about saving your life. So progesterone goes down, testosterone goes down, cortisol, your fight or flight hormone goes up, adrenaline goes up, pupils dilate, heart rate up, breathing rate up, the muscles tense, your flexor muscles tense. So some systems upregulate.
Okay.
But those 3 systems that downregulate GI, immune system, and hormone system, that's the backbone of chronic health. And if those are dysregulated, I mean, that's the number one people that come see us in our clinic, it's usually for one of those 3 systems. Immune
Yes.
system, autoimmune disease, cancer, whatever. GI stuff, which autoimmune connects with GI also, but like IBS, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, that type of stuff. And then fertility and hormone issues, thyroid and other hormone issues. So
Mhm.
it became so clear chronic stress is not compatible with health. You can't eat, exercise, and hydrate your way out of that state. This has to be addressed, or you're going to
Right.
hit a ceiling in your healing.
And it is hard work. It is hard work.
It is because you come down to same thing in our Western mind, black and white, logical left brain. Give me the thing to do, doc. Give me the breathing exercises. Give me the step 1, 2, 3 stress relief thing to do, which I don't want to come across as hardcore, like negative on those things. If you go outside and take a walk or ground, get your feet on the grass in the sunshine and hear some birds chirping and look at green space. I mean, there's studies that say cortisol comes down if you just look at green space, green leaves and grass or birds chirping. I mean, there's studies that show you can bring that fight or flight down by doing meditating, praying, breathing, deep breathing, different things. That's great. That's fine. It's good to bring that down into calm and slow that heart rate and all that.
Right.
But the big but, you got to get back in your office and get back to work or get back into your kitchen and get back to life and kids and husband and COVID and circumstances that are out of your control. And so then you start to schedule these stress relief times. I'm going to go do a deep breathing
Yes.
session every 3 hours, and that's
You're preaching
fine
to the
too.
choir.
Yeah. But ultimately, what we've learned is, and this is work, it's a personal journey, but it's changing the filters that we're seeing our circumstances through. And if we don't get down there and change our heart beliefs, then no matter what because circumstances are not fully controllable. And when you interpret a situation a certain way, it sends you into fight or flight.
Yes.
And we get tricked by thinking we got to fix that circumstance and get all our circumstances just right. And then the fight or flight will come down where no, which I'm not saying there's not something to be said for having order in your home, having a schedule, getting help if you need help, if you need a nanny, you need whatever, a babysitter to come in certain days. I'm all for order and help, but ultimately there's no way to just you try to control all your circumstances is going to drive fight or flight even more, and you're
Right.
going to
And you're going to be
crash and
sick.
burn.
Yep.
So that peace pillar to me, and again, more personal journey into discovery, more of yourself and more of God. And I really love Jamie Winship talks about if you don't see God clearly for who he really is, his true character and nature, which he is love. If you can't trust that because you don't see that clearly, you don't know him clearly. And secondly, if you don't know who God sees you as,
Yes. Right.
because we will see ourselves as unworthy, not enough, rejected, fill in the blank. But these are, I would call, Jamie Winship calls them, and I agree, false identities. Like we
Mhm.
believe core, in our being, in our heart beliefs, these things about ourselves that aren't true. If you believe you're rejected at the core, that's who you are, then you're going to fight like crazy to not feel that way. Well, then real easy, it's so, so easy to slip into people pleasing because if you can keep
Mhm.
everybody happy, then you're not rejected. It's
Right.
real easy to slip into performance mode. If I get first place, all A's first team, MVP, number one at everything, accolades, trophies, and first place ribbons, then I'm not rejected. People like me when I perform. So that performance mindset comes in, people pleasing comes in, and you want to talk about a burden, heavy. Try to live your
Right.
whole life with those goggles, seeing the whole world through. I got to keep everybody happy and be number one at everything. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, but that's rooted in this heart belief about yourself that's a lie. And so we've got to get down deeper into these lies. And honestly, those systems I said, the heart, the GI, endocrine, the immune system, these systems run off what's called the autopilot part of your nervous system. So
Yep.
there's the voluntary part of your nervous system, like my bicep. It's under 100% my voluntary control. It's not going to move till I consciously tell it to. But then I have this other muscle inside my chest, it's squeezing every second for the rest of my life. That's the heart muscle, obviously, but that's not under my conscious control. I'm not telling it to do that every second. So that's part of the autopilot. Okay. So there's those two systems. Well, this autopilot one is called the autonomic nervous system. It can only run in first gear or second gear, rest and digest, fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
And what tells it to do that, which one it's going to go, is your heart beliefs. Your heart programs autopilot, not your beating heart, but your core beliefs. So when you get that letter in the mail, you get that text message, you're in a conversation with someone, or you see some political thing happen or whatever, any data that comes in these eyeballs and these ears, it's going through a filter to be interpreted. And if that filter is the truth and your security and your identity is rooted in who God says you are, your provision and protection are coming from your Father, not from your own doing. You have these core beliefs of trust in this invisible God, which it's hard for people to do, and it's hard for me sometimes. But as you grow and mature and are able to trust in that, and then you see the fruit of that, peace will attend you despite your circumstances. And I'm not saying I have it all figured out perfectly, but like an example, I was kind of caught up in a little deal with we don't have time to get into probably. But there's this little measles outbreak, and I went to treat that. And then a bunch of political stuff happened in media,
Right.
conventional media, and it was just crazy. I mean, some people didn't like the way I was handling things and made complaints to the medical board. Well, if my identity is rooted in having an MD behind my name and my medical license, if I think my provision and my family's provision is 100% rooted in my medical license, then yeah, that's going to freak me out and flip fight or flight on and turn my flexor muscles and all the things. And I'm not saying it didn't for a moment, but I learned to recognize
Right.
that. Wait a minute. No, my provision comes from God, and who I am is not in what I do. Who I am is who God says I am. That's my identity is rooted in him, not in what I do. And most Americans, we've been raised in a culture where what you do is where you get your identity, self-worth, and value. And therefore you're real susceptible to being controlled by that thing. So we have to recognize when we're having these kind of thoughts that aren't true, bring the truth to it, and the truth sets you free. And then you can actually walk around this crazy world with it's going to, everything falling apart and going crazy, and you can still be at true peace. Now, again, I don't have it all figured out. I'm not saying I'm perfect all the time, but I do believe we can grow and mature over time. It's a journey and we get there. And as you grow into this, what you'll find, you look back and find is health wise, like my body's still functioning well. That natural detox at night, it's still happening. The stem cells are getting awakened at night to go regenerate my cartilage in my knees. I'm not getting arthritic. My brain fog's clearing because my neurons are getting cleaned up all night with melatonin because melatonin is an antioxidant. And all this stuff keeps you going physically when you're in a true state of peace. That's kind of a little bit of a nutshell. I know that's a big topic, but
Well, it's really refreshing, Ben, because you're teaching, you're preaching this, but you're also living this, and in your day to day. And thank you for being so candid and open with us. It makes me feel more, or rather, you feel more relatable. You're not just the doctor in front of me. You're somebody that, you're working this program too, and you're living this life
Mhm.
too. And I just so appreciate your approach to medicine and with your patients and your open mindedness about it. Because for me, if we were not open minded about this, I truly believe I would still be sick, if not dead, because I was getting sicker and sicker. And so it required faith, it required an open mind, an open heart. And, there was so much desperation here. But through that was led to answers and to healing. And I'm still working on that peace pillar big time.
It's a
and it
lifelong
creeps back
journey.
in the nervous system. It's crazy, that's thrown at you. But now I have the tools to, hey, like you said, how am I going to filter this? How am I going to respond to this? And we want this for our children. As parents, you teach these things to your children, but we need to remember we have to apply these too.
Yeah.
We're going through it too. So, Dr. Ben, thank you so much for your time. I wish I could give you a hug. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
The best place, just our website, Veritas. That's V as in Victor, Eritas. That's Latin for truth. So Veritas Wellness Member.com. And then on there, you can find You're the Cure program. We have an online virtual wellness membership. You can talk to our health coaches. We have content on there, and our social media links are there. Instagram, I believe, is Dr. Ben Edwards is probably our main platform. You're the Cure is the podcast. We have a YouTube page, but through the website, you can get to all of the above.
And your podcast is just fantastic. There's years of content on there. You bring in specialist, expert, just authors. It's great. It's great content. So if people have extra time, I would really encourage them to check out You're the Cure. And Dr. Ben, I thank you again, and I look forward to sharing this with folks and helping them find their own You're the Cure.
Well, thank you, Katie, for having me. Tell Chris hi. And I'm so happy to see that you're doing so good.
Thanks, Ben.
You bet.
The I Mold You So podcast with Katie Buckland Weiss.